My name is Patrick Lee. I am the chairman of the Lee Foundation. We focus our grants on education and mental health. Our reason for supporting mental health is a personal one. You see, I am the father of a son with schizophrenia. I should have said that I was the father of a son with schizophrenia. We lost our son and brother, Pat, 7 years ago. Pat was diagnosed when he was in his early 20s. I can still remember the doctor delivering the news. I did not know what schizophrenia was, and I did not understand what it would mean for Pat and my family. We did the best we could for Pat. It was not easy, and there were times we struggled to find him effective medications and treatment. Awareness of mental illness has come a long way since my son was diagnosed over 40 years ago, but there is still so much that must be done. We must educate our community about serious mental illness. With knowledge comes understanding. With understanding comes compassion. Maybe then people will choose to help those who are struggling rather than averting their gaze or hurriedly crossing the street. We must also advocate for increased funding from our state and federal governments. Philanthropy can help, but it cannot fund mental illness. It is the responsibility of all of us to demand government action. We cannot and should not delay. I want to recognize crisis services for their commitment in supporting individuals experiencing a mental health crisis. Their work is not easy, but it is so very important. I also want to thank Dan Lukasik for sharing his family's story and giving me the opportunity to tell mine. Thank you.
Paul never believed he had mental illness. He would go through periods where he was what I now know to be bipolar depression, in which he could be manic. He would be up for hours or days. He would give away every cent he had. He would make all these kinds of impulsive, erratic decisions. Sometimes he'd fall into these deep depressions, some lasting weeks and others times months. He couldn't get out of bed, he couldn't work, and he didn't want to be with other people. Maybe the last time I saw him, we got in an argument. He said, I don't have mental illness, you do. And he screamed that at me. And it was hard to keep my composure, and I said, yeah, man, I do have mental illness, but you do too, and it's okay. I take medication, I go to therapy. I have to do things because I have mental illness. I have major depression and have lived with it for 20-something years. And I tried to reach him, and I thought I could, but in the end, I couldn't.
Bipolar disorder is like depression, but there's a manic episode. So you have both the depression and the mania, at least one episode. It all gets very disruptive. But the thing about it that's important is that this is an illness that we need to treat as such.
I think I'd like to start with some of my earliest memories of my brother and my family. We have a family of, my mom and dad had 5 kids. I have 3 older siblings, my sister Diane, my brother Wally, and my brother Tony. And then there's like a 6-year difference, and then I was the fourth one born, and my younger brother Paul was 3 years younger than me. We grew up, my younger brother and I did, in this old farmhouse outside of Newfane, New York. And it was this big white farmhouse, tall with a big roof. It was in the countryside, surrounded by pear trees and a walnut tree, and it was kind of like a Huckleberry Finn childhood. And we lived on this street called Hope Lane. It was named that because our neighbor had an Italian last name named Speranza, which if you translate it from Italian means hope. So he named it Hope Lane. My siblings moved out of the house. They were older than us. So at some point it was just my younger brother, Paul, and I. You know, we get into all kinds of mischief, and we'd be dirty all the time from playing in the woods. And I remember some of my earliest memories are of my mother giving us a bath at the same time. And she'd scrub us down to get all the dirt off and then wipe us down together. So we really did everything together. We had an old basketball court, and we would play basketball and pretend that we were an NBA championship game. It was just such a magical time, and we were so close. We would lay on Hope Lane and we'd look up at the stars, and we could see shooting stars and satellites and all kinds of airplanes, and we could just lay there for hours. It seemed like time stood still, like it would just go on forever and ever, but it didn't, of course. And as we got older, we grew further apart.
If someone grows up in a family that is disorganized because of substance abuse by the parents or their own mental illness, that complicates and certainly leads to traumatic experiences for that individual in their childhood. And that, then increases the risk.
My dad was a World War II veteran who fought in the Navy. He married my mom, this great beauty. They had 5 kids together, but over time, my dad became a really bad alcoholic. We don't know, but he had all the signs of manic depression himself, and I think he drank to manage that, and he became physically and emotionally abusive. So Paul, he started out with some cards against him. I think he had some very serious genetic predisposition to this, but also just trauma.
There's a higher risk when there is a first-degree relative who has the illness, such as a sibling or a parent. Also, there's environmental things that can impact it. Something like a severe trauma or stress, which is a challenge because sometimes as people start to experience symptoms, rather than get psychiatric treatment, they try to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, which only makes it worse.
My brother and I took different paths. I did well in school, did sports. My brother Paul took the opposite path. Not just with, pot, but it quickly escalated when he was 14 to LSD. When I was at college, our mother called my brother Wally and said Paul had threatened her. They were driving in a car together, my brother Paul and my mother, and then Paul pulled the car over. He ordered my mom to get out. And she ran into a nearby bar and crying, weeping, and something was clearly wrong with my brother Paul. My brother Wally went down to Newfane and took my brother to ECMC Psychiatric Center. And at the time, they told us he had schizophrenia. That was the first of several breakdowns Paul went through over the course of his lifetime. When that happened, he was about 15 or 16. They said he'd be put on medication and then just released from the hospital.
Bipolar disorder is treatable, and one of the challenges is if someone refuses treatment, the treatment that maybe the medical staff strongly believe that the person needs. We have to balance that with their rights to refuse treatment. However, if someone is in a position where they are imminently at danger to themselves or others, medical staff can apply for treatment over objection, which is a legal process.
It was as if my brother was lost in time. Over the years, we saw each other less and less, and then there came a point where we didn't see him at all. And I remember driving over that bridge, over the river, my cell phone rang, and he said, "Is this Dan Lukasik?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "This is the Lackawanna Police Department." And he said, "You know, I have terrible news to tell you. Your brother was found dead." I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, we found him dead in a motel room, and I'm sorry, you know, drugs were involved, and he had been there a few days, dead, and there were a number of crack vials found, and they suspected fentanyl was involved." They gave me Paul's keys, the keys to his house, which I hadn't been in maybe in 5 years. This beautiful home right by the waterfront in Buffalo, New York, a beautiful townhouse. But when we stepped foot inside the house, it was so shocking on so many levels, because I walked in there and it looked like somebody had just destroyed the inside of the home. And I guess when he died, and you know, I was preparing to say a eulogy at his funeral, I was trying to like travel back in time to that time when we were so close and kind of remember him as this innocent child who he was. Even when he had grown up and he had these episodes of manic depression, bipolar depression, he helped so many people. He was such a generous, caring, loving person. There'd be long stretches of time. I remember one lasting over 10 years or more where things were going great with his career. He had a lot of friends, he was going to a therapist, and he was taking care of his physical and mental health. He had his ups and downs like all of us do, but for the most part, you know, he seemed happy. But then as he grew older, the periods between breakdowns got shorter and shorter.
It's typically a lifelong issue that someone has to deal with. And the best thing they can do is to get a treatment plan that is helpful to them. A person with bipolar has to start to learn how to take care of themselves, how to get the treatment they need, how to get good sleep, have a structured life of some sort that has supports built in. Another thing that some people do with someone they know and trust is to get a psychiatric advance directive, which can help them say, these are the kinds of treatments that I want, and the ones I don't want when I'm in my manic episode.
I was always trying to help my brother, and like a father would. And so when my brother died, you know, it wasn't just my brother dying, it was like my son dying, you know. And I felt like I had failed him, you know. I felt the system had failed him. There weren't really many places to turn. And I was really unconsolable for a while.
Family members are put through very challenging times with this because the person will often reject and blame the family rather than accept the support. They feel that there's something bad about them if they have a mental illness, or it's their fault.
The Latin or Greek word for stigma is wound, you know? So I think a more accurate way of thinking about stigma is going back to its root. And when we stigmatize somebody, we wound them in a way. Paul had been involuntarily committed to a mental health institution and had this big mark on his back of someone with mental illness. And I think that wounded him a great deal.
In September, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, nationwide sponsors walks and they have one here at Canalside in Buffalo. I remember when these first started, and this talks to the issue of stigma. There was probably 20 people walking around Delaware Park Lake, and last year it was, I think they had thousands, and it had to be moved to Canalside. When stigma goes down, treatment goes up. So I'm going to be hopeful that we're going to see some progress and see an opportunity to at least greatly reduce the number of people who take their lives.
Fentanyl may have been the mechanism of my brother's death, but I believe it was really from a lifetime of not getting the mental health care he so desperately needed. Beginning when he was about 7, he got a close-and-play record player. He could play that all day long. So as he grew older, he loved all kinds of music. He started playing guitar himself when he was about 14. Especially at the end, that was really the place, I think, if he had any comfort, it was that. I wanted to know from him if he felt that I'd let him down, that I hadn't saved him. And after he died, I had this strong sense of his spirit saying to me, it's okay, he was kind of at peace. And it was very comforting to me, very comforting to me. Mental illness doesn't have to have the final say. Love can, and so can hope. Love those who struggle with mental illness and never stop hoping and never stop trying to help.